President Trump says he plans to impose a 50% tariff on goods made in Brazil starting August 1st.
On July 9th, the current US President Donald Trump sent an open letter to the President of Brazil, Lula da Silva, threatening a 50% tariff over Brazilian goods exported to the US, starting in August 1st if a negotiation is not started. The reaction within Brazil has been heated, with the current government flirting with increasing tariffs against the United States as well. The reason for the possible tariff war between North and South America's superpowers are threefold, and their consequences are still to be fully understood. In order to comprehend the situation, let us present the alleged motivations, give them their proper context, and explore the possible outcomes of this new economic conflict. Hello everyone and welcome to the Hemisphere. It's a pleasure to have you back. So, Trump of the tropics? Let's quote the letter sent by Donald Trump. Open quote.
The way that Brazil has treated former President Bolsonaro is an international disgrace. This trial should not be taking any place whatsoever. It's a witch hunt that should end immediately.
The letter begins with an appeal by the US President to end the persecution of Brazil's former President Jair Bolsonaro. After his attempted coup d'etat in January 2023, Bolsonaro, his family, and some of Brazil's military have been under investigation, and some even arrested. In this light, Eduardo Bolsonaro, one of Jair Bolsonaro's sons, has, for a lack of better term, self-exiled himself to the United States, where, according to him, he will be able to work in Brazil's favor. Despite the economic and political consequences of a tariff war, Eduardo has celebrated the imposing of these tariffs as a victory, especially because the United States is doing them to protect his father, the former president, and attack the Brazil Supreme Court. But is that correct? Despite being the first paragraph in the open letter, the appeal to end the witch hunt is not at any point in the letter the reasoning behind the tariffs. If Eduardo was the one who lobbied Washington to include this part of the text, it's too early to tell. But the following paragraphs go further into why the United States has decided to impose tariffs in Brazil, and one of them has already been mentioned. The next paragraph are so distant from the former president that they beg to question, is this actually about Bolsonaro?
Due in part to Brazil's insidious attacks on our free elections and the fundamental free speech rights of Americans, as lately illustrated by the Brazilian Supreme Court, which has issued hundreds of secret and unlawful censorships orders to US social media platforms. That's disgusting, folks. That's unacceptable.
The biggest internal enemy of Bolsonaro and his group is definitely the Supreme Court. Mostly personified by Judge Alexandre de Moraes, the Supreme Court has not only been after him after the attempted coup, but has also been a stone in Bolsonaro's shoes during his term, especially during the pandemic. However, despite being political allies, Trump is not worried about Bolsonaro and his relationship with the court. What worries Trump is the connection between the Brazilian Supreme Court and the big techs. One of the main branches of the Donald Trump government, big techs and social media companies are looking at Brazil with worried eyes due to some decisions and speculations made by the Supreme Court. Not only has the Brazilian judiciary decided to temporarily ban acts during 2024 elections, it has also fined around $1 million a day for every day that it was kept functional in Brazilian territory. Alexandre de Moraes and Elon Musk have entered in direct conflict many times, with the ultimate result being the inclusion of Musk in the digital militia investigation for obstruction of justice and incitement of crime. Finally, the Brazil Supreme Court has been arguing how to put an end to the social media situation, and what is speculated is the responsibilities of the platforms for the content that is posted on them by their users. If a social media user posts something criminal, or perhaps something that is simply controversial, the platform in which they posted is going to be blamed along with them, sharing the repercussions. This will not only silence many users, but also force the platforms to go after the posts in order to shut them down. It basically forces social media companies to censor the users without government agents having to do so. What worries the United States government is that this understanding by the Brazilian Supreme Court can be explored by the other countries, creating a case law that will serve as inspiration on how a state should deal with social media within their territories. This could hurt some of Donald Trump's biggest allies, while undermining one of the biggest assets the United States has when it comes to influencing other countries directly. And it's one of the most relevant reasons why the tariffs could be implemented. We must move away from a long-standing and very unfair trade relationship engendered by Brazil's tariffs and non-tariff policies and trade barriers. This month, Rio de Janeiro hosted the annual BRICS meeting, with Brazil's president Lula currently serving as president of the BRICS Council. Brazil's government is championing the BRICS agenda, advocating a departure from the dollar as the global currency and promoting a new multipolar order. Washington sees this as a direct challenge to the dollar supremacy and America's global political economic hegemony. Trump, who has repeatedly criticized BRICS, imposed tariffs as a warning to other nations that the US will not tolerate threats to its influence, especially in its own hemisphere. Historically, Brazil was under US influence since the late 19th century, with American dominance intensifying during World War II due to substantial capital influx and strategic alignment. However, the rise of China in the 2000s brought a commodity boom, benefiting Brazil significantly. From 2003 to 2008, Brazil's exports to China soared. Iron ore by 633%, soybean by 309%, and crude oil by 7,760%. By 2009, China was Brazil's largest trading partner. Despite a slowdown during Brazil's recession in the early 2010s, the trade relationship remains strong. Although economically tied to China, Brazil has historically maintained geopolitical neutrality, avoiding full alignments with China's Belt and Road Initiative, or Eurasian Bloc ideology. The US remains Brazil's second largest export market, primarily for industrial goods such as aircrafts, helicopters, and gas turbines, underpinning Brazil's cautious neutrality. Yet, President Lula is adopting a more assertive stance, openly criticizing NATO and Israel, advocating for de-dollarization and pursuing projects similar to China Belt and Road Initiative, including a proposed interoceanic railway financed by China. Washington perceived this as a significant threat, not only due to Brazil's strategic importance, but because such a route would directly challenge US-controlled global trade channels. Despite not directly mentioning any of this directly in open letter, it is clear that these are relevant factors to explain the current US-Brazil situation. What does not make sense, however, is the reasoning the United States gave when it comes to the trade deficit between the US and Brazil. The United States of America is perhaps the biggest consumer in the world, which means that its trade balance is usually a deficit with other countries. This was, in fact, what prompted Trump to increase tariffs on all other countries at the beginning of his term. During that time, Brazil received one of the smallest increases, not because the deficit was small, but because Brazil is one of the few countries that the US has a trade surplus with. So, not only the US government is hiding the real reasons behind the tariffs, but the one that they're using to justify is a blatant lie. Giving these dynamics, predictions, outcomes is complex. Lula faces domestic challenges, including high inflation, corruption scandals, and criticisms of incompetence. His confrontation with the US has slightly boosted his popularity, particularly due to Trump's mention of Bolsonaro's legal trouble, reducing Lula's incentive to quickly resolve the tariff dispute, while forcing some sectors of the economy to unwillingly sit down and negotiate with the president. However, Brazil industries, agribusiness, financial sectors, and the legislature oppose Lula's current stance due to potential economic fallout. Tariffs threaten significant harm to Brazil's economy, particularly in the industrial sector, which China is unlikely to rescue since it primarily imports raw commodities from Brazil, not manufactured goods. Furthermore, the new US-Argentina Free Trade Agreement may accelerate Brazil's industrial reallocation to Argentina, exacerbating Brazil's deindustrialization. On top of that, the chances of Lula increasing tariffs back is high. If Lula continues his current path, Brazil risks becoming a mere commodity exporter under Chinese influence, resembling many African nations in China's Belt and Road sphere. Such a shift will represent a significant geopolitical victory for China, enabling competition with the Panama Canal and furthermore, Erdogan US influence in Latin America, an outcome Washington views as disastrous and unacceptable. Domestically, the tariffs have been terrible for Bolsonaro and could be great for Lula. Now, only time and political expertise will tell. So yeah, that's basically it. I'd like to thank you for coming back to the Hemisphere. It was a pleasure having you guys here today. Please, if you have any questions, comments, or topics, send them down here in the comments and we'll try to answer all of them. It's a pleasure, and we value your support so much. Thank you very much, and have a great day. And remember to follow us on Instagram and on X. Here are the links. Thank you very much.